Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yasmin Hassan with the Public Information Office, and I am going to be serving as your moderator for today's news conference. We will be talking about the final phase of Proposition B and enforcement. We have two speakers today. That is the Interim Chief of Police, Joseph Chacon, and our Homeless Strategy Officer, Diana Gray. I also want to introduce our pool reporter, who will be Alex Capriello with KXAN. He's going to be asking all the questions on behalf of the media, but first we want to begin with you, Chief.
Oh, thank you, Yasmin, and good afternoon, everyone. Joseph Chacon, I'm the Interim Chief of Police here in Austin. I appreciate the opportunity to continue to talk about how we're implementing Prop B and transitioning here to Phase 4, which is the final stage of our phased approach to this implementation. I want to thank all of our partners in other city departments that have made the implementation of our responsible public space management program a success to this point. And we will continue our plan as we have laid out over the last several months. So just taking a moment to provide an update on what we have accomplished during the first three phases, which began on May 11th. And these numbers will run all the way through August the 2nd. So not quite to the end of Phase 3, but these are the most updated numbers that we have today. Our teams have conducted 133 site visits at 86 separate sites throughout the city and have identified approximately 1,290 tents or encampments during those visits. We have contacted 605 individuals that agreed to be surveyed as part of our overall efforts. Although many more than that were actually contacted. That's just the number of individuals that agreed to be surveyed. We've offered coordinated assessments for individuals to get on the pathway to permanent housing. Along those lines, 124 have completed a housing assessment within the past 6 months. 71 people have been connected to faith-based organizations. 67 have been connected to nonprofit organizations, and 34 veterans have been connected to the VA to obtain benefits. From an enforcement perspective, we've had to issue 572 warnings during this time, and we have issued 24 citations to the early August date. We have not had to make any custody arrests yet. All of those citations are being handled through the downtown Austin Community Court, as was outlined in the phased implementation plan. This past Sunday, we entered Phase 4 of the plan. During all phases, including in Phase 4, we have continued our education and outreach efforts and continue to operate from a harm reduction standpoint with the objective to get individuals experiencing homelessness on a path to supportive housing. We continue camp cleanup efforts in conjunction with our partners at Austin Resource Recovery and Austin Public Works, and we're making it out to about 10 to 20 individual sites per week. Our officers assigned to the Homeless Outreach Street Team, also known as HOST, continue to work with our district representatives on the prioritization of Phase 4 of our plan for Prop B implementation. We continue to work diligently to ensure that all persons encountered during this endeavor are treated with dignity and respect. In coordination with community court leadership, we want to make sure that those individuals who come to the court, either through citation or, if necessary, a custody arrest, are connected with appropriate social services. I think it's important for people to know that we continue to try to keep making arrests a last resort and finding alternative methods to accomplish Prop B implementation. Those are kind of my opening comments. I'll turn it over now to our Homelessness Strategy Officer, Diana Gray. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Chacon. Diana Gray here, Homeless Strategy Officer with the City of Austin. I think that I would like to contextualize this conversation always within the in the framework of our overarching efforts to end homelessness in our community, and that ongoing work. Since the beginning of June, we have opened 2 additional city shelters, both of those in converted hotels, and moved over 110 people off the streets through the HEAL initiative. Importantly, those individuals who are moved into bridge shelter are offered not only shelter, but are immediately working with case managers and have resources to find their permanent housing placement and open up those shelter beds for new individuals who can come off the streets and into shelter. Just August 2nd, we closed on the purchase of another hotel. It is a 60 unit or 60 room currently hotel in District 7 near off Mopac and Schofield Farms Lane. And that is going to provide deeply supportive, long-term affordable housing for 60 of the most chronically homeless individuals in our community. Then just yesterday, Caritas of Austin and their partner Vecino Group broke ground on a 171 unit project called Aspero Austin at Rutland. And that too will provide long-term housing for people effectively ending their homelessness. All of this is set against the backdrop of the historic commitment that Council has made last month regarding the use of the American Rescue Plan Act funds toward ending homelessness in our community. So as folks look for places to come out of encampments, as we target certain encampments through the HEAL initiative, as individuals may even come into contact with the Downtown Austin Community Court, our original and lasting goal is to ensure that there are resources to meet them there, and that when they are then connected with that social worker, we can move them into permanent housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana and Chief Chacon. Now I want to bring in Alex Capriello with KXAN. He will be asking all of the questions on behalf of the media. Alex?
First of all, thank you very much for having us and for answering our questions. We have a list of questions from several local outlets. The first comes from us at KXAN. While the city has made a concentrated effort to clean up areas designated through the HEAL initiative, there is still homelessness seen across the city in other underpasses, intersections, and medians. In particular, I'm thinking east of I-35 on Riverside Drive, where there's still a sizable encampment there. What is the strategy for connecting and addressing those people if it's not one of the 4 designated HEAL initiative sites?
So I'll speak to this. You know, the HEAL initiative is a new approach to taking people off the streets and providing them shelter and eventually housing, but it is certainly not our only avenue. We function largely through our community in what's called a continuum of care, and essentially a community priority list or waiting list for housing, and have historically rehoused about 1,800 people over each year through that system. That system and those resources remain in place. HEAL was in addition to that. Of course, when one person is placed out of an encampment, it doesn't necessarily make the visual difference and people may not notice. Secondarily, what we are working on right now has been from the very beginning framed as the first phase of the HEAL initiative. So these first 4 sites for us to establish a process, make some improvements as necessary, and find out what works best. We are nearing the end of that, and Council, while no final budgetary decisions have been made, for example, Council Member Kitchen, who was the sponsor of the resolution of creating the HEAL initiative originally, has signaled a strong interest in directing staff to continue the HEAL initiative and providing funding to do so. So that would, of course, allow us to target additional sites.
Our next question comes from the Austin American Statesman. When will HEAL, and it sounds like this is a direct response to your response. When will HEAL Phase 2 begin, and what areas in the city will be addressed?
So I need to be clear that there is a pending budget amendment, and so no council decision has been taken on this front. But I know that Councilmember Kitchen and some of the original co-sponsors are anxious to see Phase 2 begin very early in the new fiscal year. We anticipate completing Phase 1 by the end of this month. And to the question of where the sites will be, part and parcel of the direction to staff in the original resolution was to complete the initial 4 encampments and then develop criteria for identifying future sites. So those criteria, of course, will be focused on health and safety of both the encampment occupants and surrounding citizens and businesses. So any dangers that are created by virtue of the site of the encampment itself. So we will be doing that based on our experience in Phase 1 during the month of September. Would expect to come back to council certainly between then and the beginning of November, which is generally when we have talked about beginning Phase 2.
Our next question comes from the Texan. Has APD tracked crime rates among the homeless community in which homeless individuals are victims, perpetrators, or both? If so, what's the latest on those figures?
You know, we don't really track that per se on an ongoing basis. We have had some questions that have been raised by community and by council in the past related to that type of data. And, you know, certainly could pull that kind of data. Again, we don't have a good set of historical data that would be good to compare to, say, beginning before or after, you know, the HEAL initiative or Prop B implementation, but certainly can pull that data and will be responsive to that.
The next question from the Austin Chronicle. When APD officers have cleared out camps during Prop B phased enforcement periods, how many arrests have been made for offenses unrelated to the public camping and no sit, no lie ordinances?
We have not had to make any arrests related to anything other. We've not had to make any arrests, period. So none for the camping or the other ordinances, and nothing outside of that either.
Our next question comes from Spectrum News 1. When APD detained and removed campers from Austin City Hall on June 14th due to stated construction taking place that day, what are the details of that construction? Did it take place that day, or has it taken place? Who authorized that day's removal of campers?
Well, I'll go ahead and at least answer the portion of that I have the information on. The construction did not start the same day that the action was taken. It was set to begin shortly thereafter, and to my understanding has begun and continues. With regards to who kind of made the decision to do that, you know, that really was a collective decision that was made by a number of department directors in coordination with the city manager's office about, you know, just it was really about keeping people safe. And we had individuals that were camped there that were going to not be safe once that construction started, or were going to, because of where they were located, prevent the construction from starting at all. And so, you know, we notified folks, let them know that they needed to move, and then ultimately had to show up and make sure that that occurred in a safe manner. And you know, that construction, to my knowledge, is continuing.
Our next question comes from Austonia News. Where are police telling homeless individuals to go when asking them to vacate their camps? Do you anticipate a spike of arrests?
So our officers, we just heard, Diana talking about how they're continuing to try to find shelters and locations for people to go. As that information comes to the officers, that is being passed along to folks that we're encountering as part of this overall initiative. We also have our two designated places in the city where people are allowed to camp. McKinney Falls State Park, as well as Emma Long Park. And that information is passed along as well. As future sites are developed, obviously we would be passing that information to the people that we're encountering.
Our next question is from Community Impact. Could you detail the cost in terms of actual dollars and time spent, officer, city department resources used of Prop B implementation so far? Is that scope expected to change through phase 4 and beyond?
I don't know if anyone is actually tracking how much the cost has been so far. Obviously there's more than the police department that's involved with this, with a number of other city departments, including, resource recovery, public works, the parks and others that are all dedicated to making sure that this works. Each one of those departments would have to get with their own individual budget officers to determine what time was spent and what that cost looks like to be able to detail that out. The police department has done it in the past based on whatever incident that we were working on or whatever effort that we were trying to accomplish, and could do it again for this type of effort. But each one of those departments would need to go ahead and detail that out.
Our next question comes from KUT. KUT spoke with a downtown Austin Community Court administrator who said Friday only one ticket had gone through the DACC over the entire time frame of reinstating the ban on camping. Can you explain why they only saw one, but Chief Chacon said 24 tickets issued went through DACC? Do you anticipate more cases going through municipal courts now?
So all of those, that particular title code, when it's listed on one of our citations, is routed to our downtown Austin Community Court. We, as time has gone on, remember during the first two phases of implementation, we were not issuing citations. And it wasn't until late in phase 3 that we began issuing citations. It does take some time for the citations leaving the officer's hand to get to the downtown Austin Community Court. And so they might have only, at the time that the reporter spoke with someone at DACC, have only seen one, when I can tell you that, up to that point now, we've issued 24. So the rest of them will make it through that process and will get there. And we don't anticipate any tickets having to go to regular municipal court.
Our next question from CBS Austin. How often is APD clearing out homeless camps now that we are in phase 4? Are camps not being cleared out as fast because there is not enough housing for those experiencing homelessness?
As I kind of mentioned during my opening comments, we are every week, 2 days a week, working with our partners at Resource Recovery on encampment site cleanups. And we are usually making it to between Now, during this part of the implementation, obviously people are having to move. And so, depending on how long that takes at each individual encampment, depending on how many people are there, will dictate how many we're going to be able to do every week. But that effort has begun as of Sunday and is actually continuing even today.
Our next question from Fox 7 Austin. Are you seeing an increase in the number of people camping in green belts and wooded areas as homeless camps are cleared out?
I can speak to this, I think, Diana Gray here. We as a city have cross-departmental meetings regularly and have been checking in with our partners in Parks and Recreation, in watershed protection, et cetera. We are certainly seeing movement in encampments, seeing a lot of abandoned encampments, and seeing people move around. At last check-in, the feeling was that it was as yet unclear whether we were seeing a market increase in our Parks and Recreation lands, which is very substantial acreage, of course, and the watershed protection properties. We know that folks are obviously going somewhere. And so we're just going to be keeping our eye on what is a fluid situation in terms of the potential movement of encampments and can continue to provide information as we have a clearer picture of what's happening.
We're back at the top of our list. The next question comes from KXAN. Can you give us more details on the diversion program that was first introduced during phase 1 or 2, I believe? At that time, Chief Chacon had said that it was something that was still being developed. Is there more information that you can share with us there?
I just want to make sure I understand. Are we talking about mental health diversion? Are we talking about overall arrest diversion? What type of diversion are we talking about?
I believe at the time you had said, in particular, it was trying to keep people out of the downtown Austin community court. And so there were diversion tactics that you were going to use to prevent that from happening. And perhaps it was related to mental health.
Whether it is somebody experiencing homelessness or not, in the area of mental health for many low-level offenses, myself and my staff have been engaged with the county attorney's office, with our local mental health authority at Integral Care to talk about how we are diverting those that are in mental health crisis out of the criminal justice system. So that continues as an effort, is assigned under a single point of contact on one of my assistant chiefs to continue that effort. And I don't have any significant updates on that at this moment.
Our next question from Austin American Statesman. What are the plans for the Days Inn Hotel, the city leased in Central Austin?
So the Days Inn Hotel was operated as one of our 5 protective lodges over the course of the COVID pandemic. In those pro lodges, we sheltered people experiencing homelessness who were at particular risk of death or very poor health outcomes should they contract COVID. But we have been demobilizing those properties now for some months. In June, as we looked at what our options were to create additional crisis capacity for people experiencing homelessness, we were at the point of demobilizing the Pro Lodge that was at the Days Inn. So to extend the opportunity there, we extended the lease and we're looking at it as potential for another bridge shelter. But at the same time, COVID again surged in the community, and another need that was identified
as an urgent need was the need for an isolation facility for those who are actually infected with COVID and cannot isolate themselves from their loved ones or others in their homes. And so that facility is now being utilized in the COVID response as an isolation facility.
Our next question from the Texan. Since the beginning of 2019, how much has the city of Austin spent on all of its homeless initiatives and projects?
I think that that is a question that we would probably want to answer with a little more time to gather and report. And we've certainly had similar questions from the press in the past. We'll nail down the time frame, a specific time frame of the request and the scope. And we'll say that our budget for both last fiscal year and this fiscal year is around $65 million for all things that touch homelessness, from building housing to providing services to cleaning up encampments. And again, that amount, while level funding, includes both sort of ongoing services that are keeping people in housing, that are funding our shelters, et cetera, and substantial sums which go toward investments in the creation of long-term housing units for this population.
A question from the Austin Chronicle. The Days Inn was not used for bridge shelter, partly because of complaints from neighbors. The Candlewood Motel is facing similar resistance. What can the city do to make the opening of a new shelter or supportive housing space smoother, given the urgent need to provide places for people to go?
So I think that there are some fundamental differences in the Candlewood and in any bridge shelter that we're looking at. First of all, the Candlewood is permanent housing. It is not a shelter. People live there. They have ongoing services. They do not leave unless they wish to during the day. And people are typically very stable. In terms of bridge shelter, we certainly believe that bridge shelter can be a very good neighbor. However, we, partly because of Prop B, we're looking to move very quickly, not just to make a decision, but to stand something up. We now have had, been discussing Candlewood for over 6 months, prior to completing the transaction. We were looking to do something in the space of less than 30 days. And so in acknowledgement of some new concerns that had arisen from an adjacent childcare, that we wanted to make sure we had time to discuss and address, and in light of the fact that we had another urgent need for an isolation facility, we made the decision to utilize our Country Inn, former Country Inn and Suites hotel that the city also owned, as a bridge shelter. So I certainly think, we are cognizant of the need to educate and, inform and understand the concerns of our neighbors. In many cases, we have certainly invested a lot of time in answering the questions of some of the folks who are concerned about what is now the Candlewood Hotel, and are happy to continue to do so. In the case of that particular bridge shelter, we needed to move quickly and had other alternatives, and so we took those choices.
Our next question from Austonia News. In what areas are city departments finding abandoned camps? Has City Council made further progress on locating a city-sanctioned camp?
So I'm not entirely sure I understand the first part of the question. I think that we are seeing signs of people leaving encampments, I think, across the city. Perhaps the most visible of that is at our underpasses, where as our regular cleanup crews make rounds, they are finding substantially more tents and items that have been discarded. The individuals are no longer there. But I believe that that is happening, maybe happening in many parts of the city. The last update that we provided to council was, I believe, July 19th, is followed by briefings and some conversations during the budget sessions as well. We provided council with our analysis of the 2 city-owned sites that that most fit the criteria that had been established for designated encampments, provided them with cost estimates, some timeline around what it would take to complete rezoning and entitlement, and what we thought would be adequate in terms of resourcing and timeline for community engagement. At that point have said that we would look to council for further direction if they wish us to continue the exploration of those city-owned sites in particular.
Our next question from Community Impact. If there's any expectation for the scale of potential arrests, what portion of those do you expect will be possible to link through downtown Austin Community Court? Is staffing there in shape to handle a potential increased load through phase 4? And if not, what alternate path will those arrested be sent down?
So we don't anticipate to have to significantly scale up the number of arrests that we're making as part of this. We will look for enforcement efforts, always go with the lowest level of enforcement. Generally, that is the citation. And before we even go to the citation, we're trying to get that voluntary compliance. We found that in the overwhelming majority of cases that one of those 2 options is sufficient to go ahead and get people to move. But for those cases where we do have to make a custody arrest, we're attempting to do that during the business hours of downtown Austin Community Court, so that rather than transporting them directly to jail, we're taking them directly to the court, so that they can go directly in front of a magistrate there. And my communications with the leadership at DACC has been very good. They are certainly ready to take people that are, or any officers that have someone in custody immediately. If we have to make a custody arrest outside the hours of DACC's normal operation, then those people would have to go to Travis County Jail, and the next morning would be transferred over to DACC for disposition. So, we're trying to avoid that, but there may be times where public safety is at risk, their own safety is at risk, and we have to make an arrest that would be after hours, and that's how we would handle that piece. But they're certainly ready for what we, any arrests that we might have to make, and I don't anticipate significantly scaling that up.
Our next question comes from KUT. What's Austin's current inventory of bridge and emergency shelter currently? Do y'all anticipate reaching the summit benchmark of getting 200 people into shelter by the end of August?
So we now have operational approximately 140 beds of bridge shelter in the 2 facilities that I just described. We may be able to increase our number of beds in those 2 facilities as we repair some existing rooms. The number of shelter beds in our traditional shelters has fluctuated due to COVID over the course of the pandemic. And so I'd actually like to be able to get back to you on that, but we certainly had seen a decrease of over 200 beds for single individuals due to COVID over the course of the pandemic. We are looking at of course, we'll look at our numbers housed at the end of August, and would hope to meet that number. But right now, what we do know is that through the HEAL initiative, we've got 110 plus people in shelter that will be enrolled in housing programs and who are actively, many of whom are actively already searching for their apartment with housing support secured in their name.
That looks to be the end of the questions from our local news media.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you to all the members of the media who did submit their questions. I do also want to take a few minutes if Chief Chacon or Diana, you have any final comments, things that you'd like the public to know.
I didn't want to be rude and go first, but I'll just go ahead and jump in there first. Thank you, Yasmin, and thank you to all the members of the media that are taking time to continue to highlight the work that we're doing in this really important area. The police department will continue, obviously, to work with our other city departments and under city leadership to make sure that we fully implement, the desire of the voters, and that we're going to work through this in a responsible way, in a way that we make sure, as I stated earlier, that we're treating people with dignity and respect, that we are providing those wraparound services for people to get them the help they need, like we talked about during the call, whether it's mental health services, whether the fact that they're unsheltered, or if they have other needs, we want to make sure that we're connecting them with the services that are available. And so that's kind of the focus and the way that we've handled this from the very beginning, and we will continue to handle it while, of course, having to do some enforcement efforts wherever necessary. So I'll turn it over to Diana, but I just want to say thank you once again for the opportunity to get in front of you and talk about this important issue.
Thank you, Chief. I will, I think, echo the Chief's sentiment. I appreciate you being with us today, allowing us to talk about this, and frankly, to talk, both about Prop B enforcement, the enforcement of the voter-approved ballot initiative, alongside continued conversation about how we are resourcing and the need of the community around housing and services, and really asking the right questions. The last question there was, are we, how many folks are we going to have housed by the end of August? And what I'd like us to be doing long term is to be really keeping our eye on the prize in terms of the strategies that really solve this problem, which are let's get people dignified places to live, the support services, employment, et cetera, that they want and need, and be proud of all of the efforts that we are collectively making as a city and a community.
I want to give a very sincere thank you to everyone involved, not just today, but for really what you do every single day, day in and day out. And I know this is such an important topic for so many people, and there will continue to be a lot of questions, but the city has set up a website with all the very latest information. We will continue to keep that updated. It is austintexas.gov/homelessness. Thank you so much for attending.